A psychiatrist's murder sparks an investigation in the Las Vegas desert.
This looks like somebody's grandfather here. We knew right away that it was a different type of murder.
When evidence points to a Playboy model, investigators delve into a world of fame, money, and manipulation.
The places that she would be out with me at are literally the #1 nightclubs in all of Hollywood.
She goes by the nickname Bad Barbie. She ends up on the covers of a couple of magazines.
As the strange case unfolds, the surprises never stop.
She told me he was like her sugar daddy.
I initially had estimated expenses at about $300,000. I said, you know, this is bad. You need to get out of this.
She had control over him. He was just a meal ticket.
But more suspects emerge.
We found a bat with his name on it. This is a slam dunk.
We discovered her boyfriend had recently completed a prison term here in Nevada.
He had a gun that was covered in blood. She was kicking him, hitting him, screaming at him. He told me that he hopes that they don't kill me too.
Las Vegas, Nevada is internationally known for its gambling and nightlife.
Las Vegas is a place where you can, come and let loose. It ends up sticking with people, and it ends up carrying them to another place.
But on March 7th, 2019, it seems one visitor's stay has taken a turn for the worse when police receive an unsettling call.
We had a citizen out four-wheeling in his new pickup, and he sees a Mercedes-Benz, a little two-door coupe, where no little two-wheel drive coupe should be. He thought the car was stolen.
When patrolmen arrive at the scene, the caller is gone, but the car is right where they said it would be.
They were going to do an inventory of the car and just have it towed out of there. They open up the doors. There was a lot of blood spatter evidence within the car.
The blood was found primarily in the back seat, behind the driver's seat, and on the headliner.
The officers immediately call for backup and check the rest of the vehicle.
And when they opened up the trunk, there was a bunch of bedding. When they were able to part some of the bedding, they came across what appeared to be a human arm. They made notification to the homicide section, and that's how my partner and I became aware of the call. My partner, Detective Ryan Jager, and I drove out to eastern Clark County.
We carefully documented everything that's in the car, and then we towed the whole car with the body in it back to the CSA, our crime lab. Once it was in our garage where it was a more controlled environment, we removed the body. I remember looking at it, it was just kind of like, this looks like somebody's grandfather here. He was wearing like a sweater vest with a bow tie. This didn't look like a guy who would make bad life choices to put him in a situation where someone would kill him.
Investigators leave the body for the medical examiner to assess, and they conduct a more thorough search of the car.
In the trunk of the car, I found a credit card with the name of Thomas Burchard on it. We ran that name, and it came up as a missing person. The report gave a description, white male adult in his 70s, and it matched very closely the person we had in the trunk.
However, when police run the car's plates, they discover it does not belong to Thomas Burchard.
The name that was associated with the registered owner from San Francisco was an Asian name, and his build was much smaller. The San Francisco Police Department attempted to go and make contact, but the registered owner was out of the country at the time.
While questions surrounding the vehicle multiply, detectives try to get to the bottom of who Thomas Burchard is.
I was able to conduct a records check and learned that Thomas Burchard had been recently reported missing by Judy Earp. So I instructed some fellow homicide detectives to reach out to her and have casual conversations with her without giving away that this might have become a homicide investigation.
Judy said that he missed the flight, so Judy filed the missing persons report. So her concern was something must have happened to him because he would always come home.
Thomas Burchard was a man who always seemed destined to make a difference in the world.
He was born in Boston in 1948. His father taught at Harvard, and his mother was a librarian, so he was surrounded with academia. He went to medical school at UVA, University of Virginia in Charlottesville, for child psychiatry. And after that, he did several, residencies at Mass General, Cincinnati Children's Hospital, UCLA. He loved children. And for the longest time, Tom was the only child psychiatrist in Monterey County.
Some people called him Santa because of his large white beard. And like Santa, Thomas was extremely generous.
His former patients talk about what an incredible human being he was and how he assisted them through some very difficult times in their lives.
Over the years, I believe Tom has helped hundreds of people.
Due to his generous nature, Thomas developed close relationships with all of his patients. But by the time he was in his early 50s, he still didn't have a family to call his own. That changed in 2002 when he met Judy Earp, a single mother whose own marriage had recently ended.
We met here in Las Vegas with a group. While everybody else was out gambling, we were just kind of left to ourselves, and we talked and chatted, went to shows, and just hit it off. For about a year, we dated. It was kind of long distance. And eventually we moved in together. My 3 youngest children, he was, the father figure in their life.
Eventually, they got engaged. And over the course of the next 17 years, Thomas and Judy built a life together in Salinas, California. But they often returned to the city where they first met.
We would come to Las Vegas every year for medical conferences.
In 2019, at the age of 71, Thomas was still seeing patients, but his health forced him to start planning for retirement.
The last 18 months of his life, he started having problems. I highly suspect that he's in the early stages of Alzheimer's or some form of dementia. During this time, Tom went on a trip to Las Vegas. It was a very spur-of-the-moment thing, and he booked a flight on Friday and to return on Monday. He didn't come home on the airplane. Then I knew something terrible had happened. When I initially reported Tom missing, I told them maybe he's got lost or something.
Las Vegas police begin their investigation by contacting Thomas's partner, Judy. Judy says Thomas went to Vegas to visit a friend named Kelsey Turner.
He was well known in the community for helping. He had received a text from Kelsey Turner that she was very sick. He went to her house to talk to her. The next day, I get a text from him, which is Saturday, and he says, "I look forward to coming home. See you on Monday." Okay. but I don't hear from him.
Judy goes on to tell police that Thomas has been missing for almost a week.
She had requested what is known as a welfare check. The patrol officers go to Kelsey Turner's home. They knock, there is no answer. There's mail piled at the door. And as a detective, what it suggested to us is that the residence has now been suddenly vacated, and we cannot account for Kelsey Turner, living or dead. So it's imperative in this investigation that we find her to determine if she is in fact still alive, because somebody that she's closely connected to is deceased.
Coming up, detectives find a crucial piece of evidence.
There was a baseball bat, and on the baseball bat, written in marker, was a name.
We were able to determine it was her boyfriend.
And Thomas's partner believes she knows why he was killed.
She's trying to use whatever she can to keep his money coming.
Investigators have found what they believe is Dr. Thomas Burchard's body in the trunk of a car. And the following morning, they attend an autopsy to confirm.
Through fingerprints, they were able to confirm that, in fact, the body of the deceased was Thomas Burchard. The medical examiner decided that the cause of death was blunt force trauma.
Closer inspection of the Mercedes provides clues to how the murder occurred.
You could see defects in the headliner where you could tell something was being swung and it was hitting the ceiling of the car. In the trunk of the car was probably one of the most complete body disposal kits that I've stumbled across in my career. There was leather gloves, there was rags, there was garbage bags full of cleaning products.
There was potential DNA evidence. There were latent prints.
There was a baseball bat, and on the baseball bat, written in marker, was a name, Greg Haggio.
Now that they have more information and Thomas is officially identified, detectives call Judy to break the news.
I received a phone call. It was Detective Jaeger, and he told me that they'd found Tom. I asked him, well, can I talk to him? Is he okay? And he said no, he was deceased. And at that time, my world crashed in.
By virtue of her alibi, we were able to determine that Judy had nothing to do with the murder of Thomas Burchard.
Detective Jaeger told me that he'd been found in the trunk of a Mercedes.
After learning this detail from detectives, Judy reveals valuable insight.
Judy tells investigators that the Mercedes found in the middle of the desert belongs to Kelsey Turner.
I suspect that she's involved in this somehow. So I told him everything about Tom's whole history with Kelsey Turner.
Judy says Thomas met Turner 2 years ago. She was a 25-year-old single mother who was struggling financially.
He starts helping her out with her finances and helping her out with rent.
According to Judy, Turner quickly became a problem.
He did this for so many people, and a few of them took advantage, but nothing to the extent of this. It was always, oh, I need money for medicine for my son, or this or that. I initially had estimated just what I had known from rent and car and some of the credit card expenses at about $300,000. But when I actually delved into the records, I stopped counting at about $750,000. I told Tom, I said, this is bad. You need to get out of this. He said, okay, I will tell her.
He wanted to move her out of state to kind of quell the waters a little bit, to keep everything, the friction down between Judy and her. So he rented a house in Las Vegas.
Judy says when she found out about the new arrangement, she convinced Thomas to cut Turner off for good. That was the purpose of his trip when he left for Vegas on March 1st.
The next day, I get a text from him. I have effectively resolved the situation here, and I'm looking forward to returning home on Monday.
But on Sunday, Judy got a strange message from him.
I received this text saying he wanted to send me money, and so I'm thinking, this is fishy. The language, the grammar was not his. I think she's stolen his phone and is trying to get my information. And so I texted back. I said, you need to call me. I don't believe this is you. And after that, the phone went dead.
Now, Judy is convinced Kelsey Turner had something to do with Thomas's death. Based on the circumstances of his visit, investigators are starting to share that suspicion. After Judy's interview, investigators get in touch with the registered owner of the Mercedes in San Francisco.
He explained that he turned over the lease of the vehicle to Kelsey Turner, and that transfer process was facilitated by Thomas Bouchard. And according to Miss Erb, Thomas had traveled last minute to Las Vegas for the sole purpose of cutting her off. So that's when the focus began to narrow on Kelsey Turner. Through local records checks, we found an incident that was about a month before the murder that involved Miss Turner and an individual by the name of Greg Haggio.
We're able to determine that Greg Haggio was a boyfriend of Kelsey Turner.
If he is the boyfriend at the time and this individual is coming to visit his girlfriend, you can see that we have the potential for even a love triangle that went terribly awry.
I had a arrest warrant ready to go. I'm like, dude, we found a bat with his name on it, with blood on it. Come on, this is a slam dunk.
We speak with Greg, and it appeared that Greg and Kelsey broke up.
Greg Haggio wasn't happy with the kind of life that Kelsey was leading with the partying, and so he left. And he left all of his belongings in Kelsey's house. We looked at historical phone locations on him. He was actually working as a deckhand on a fishing boat when the murder happened. So we were able to rule Greg Haggio out of the equation.
Since Kelsey Turner is the only connection left to track down, investigators obtain a search warrant for her home in Las Vegas.
Some uniformed patrol officers showed up and were able to make entry through an unlocked door. They determined that the house was unoccupied. We could establish very quickly that was our crime scene.
Police find bloodstains. They find blue and white towels that match the towels that were found inside the car in the desert. They find a door that was almost off of its hinges, completely broken. There's also a smell of cleaning products and some sort of attempt of a cleanup inside the home.
Despite all the evidence in the home pointing to foul play, investigators still can't find Kelsey Turner.
We would have fully expected her to have reached out to law enforcement because Thomas's role in her life is so important, but there's no effort whatsoever for Kelsey Turner to make contact with law enforcement. None. It's not like she's involved or she's dead. It's more like she's likely involved and we have to find her.
The evidence in Kelsey Turner's home suggests Dr. Thomas Burchard might have been killed there. So detectives contact the landlord of the property to see if they know where she is.
When police talk to the landlord, they confirm that Thomas Burchard had been paying the rent there and that Kelsey Turner lived inside the home.
Police discover Kelsey had 2 roommates, a woman named Diana Pena and a man named John Kennison. Uncertain of their connection to Kelsey, investigators take a closer look at the roommates.
So once we determine everybody that's staying at the house, that's when we start investigating to get good phone numbers for them.
While waiting for cell information, investigators also put out a BOLO alert for all 3. They then track down Turner's loved ones to learn more about her.
So as police are talking with acquaintances, friends, and family members of Kelsey Turner, they learn that Kelsey comes from Arkansas, had divorced parents, and kind of grew up with a little bit of a rough upbringing. People always said she did not seem like the type of woman who would stay in Arkansas. They knew she had big dreams. She wanted to be in front of a camera.
Turner married and had 2 children, but when the relationship ended, she took the children and moved to California to pursue her dreams.
Kelsey Turner was an aspiring model. She had a very involved social media platform that she was utilizing to move her modeling career forward.
She ends up on the covers of a couple of magazines, including Playboy Italia and Maxim, but a lot of her work is through Instagram. She has hundreds of thousands of followers. She goes by the nickname Bad Barbie and really kind of leans into that persona.
According to Kelsey's friends, she was doing more than just modeling.
I'm a celebrity DJ, and I first met Kelsey when she started coming out with other girls that were in our Hollywood Kids circle. The places that she would be out with me at are literally the #1 nightclubs in all of Hollywood. Most of the girls that would come out with me were there to find, someone else that could help them get to another level. Kelsey seems like another needy LA girl, that's just trying to find someone to latch onto. That's just all it seemed to me.
And it seems Kelsey eventually found what she was looking for.
About a year after that Playboy appearance is when she starts reaching out to Dr. Thomas Burchard for help with finances.
Burchard was kind of her sugar daddy, paying for the residence, paying for the car, paying for car insurance.
I believe that Thomas Burchard and Kelsey Turner had some kind of a physical relationship, but, a lot of people were able to keep that to themselves.
Even without confirmation on the exact nature of their relationship, it's clear to investigators Kelsey leaned on Thomas.
It appears that after Playboy Italia, she didn't really have any big publications or any great gigs in modeling. Thomas says, hey, I'll pay you to move to Las Vegas, thinking that it would be a better spot for her.
They determined that it might be best for her to relocate to Las Vegas to help advance her modeling career in this city.
Kelsey's daughter stayed in California with family, and her son joined her in Vegas. Friends confirm she was sharing the house Burchard provided with her friend Diana Pena and new boyfriend John Kennison.
When we looked into the background of John Logan Kennison, we discovered that he had recently completed a prison term here in Nevada for drug-related offenses. Now we have other names of people that are intimately connected to the home. We need to be able to get a hook into them and have an opportunity to interview them and figure out what's going on.
In March 2019, the search for Thomas Burchard's killer continues as detectives subpoena the data of Kelsey Turner and her roommates, hoping to build a timeline.
Thomas arrived in Las Vegas on March 1st during the evening hours. His body's found the 7th. And it's apparent by March 4th, something happened when he didn't return home to California. So the 1st to the 4th are very, very important dates as it relates to devices being at or near the Puritan address.
We have Diana Pena, Kelsey Turner, and then John Kennison. We know are all living in the house. We get good phone numbers for them. We do a location history on those phone numbers. Everybody was at the house late night hours of March 3rd into early morning hours of March 4th. And then Diana Pena, John Kennison, Kelsey Turner, they all leave the house.
Based on the phone records, their phones all appeared to be shut off around the same time and ended in the area of the Rio Hotel.
Detectives contact the Rio Hotel, hoping the three might be there.
We find out that Diana Pena had rented a room at the Rio, and they just abruptly left all of their items. Upon learning that information, we generated a search warrant to go into the storage room at the Rio to search for what items that were left.
They found personal items of Diana Pena, some prescription drugs, and a black notebook belonging to Thomas Burchard. They also found the ID of Kelsey Turner.
Inside what appears to be Thomas's notebook, they find his account of how desperate Kelsey had been to maintain his financial support.
She was threatening him, accusing him of child pornography. Totally unfounded and absolutely untrue. But if you can imagine a man that his whole life has been a children's psychiatrist, how devastating just those accusations would be.
I submitted Thomas Burchard's phone to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Internet Crimes Against Children. They found no evidence of child pornography on the device. So Kelsey Turner's allegation was completely unfounded. But if that information were to be released to the public, it would be incredibly damaging to Thomas's reputation.
Being attractive and providing companionship to Burchard is paying for her house, it's paying for her car, and she doesn't want to get off the gravy train. She's trying to use whatever she can to keep his money coming.
Because police were able to find that connection of the car to Kelsey Turner, the home with bloodstains inside, and the towels matching the home and the car, and a black notebook from Thomas Burchard inside that hotel room. That gives them the green light for an arrest warrant.
The search for Miss Turner was turned over to a criminal apprehension team. It took them about a week, but they were able to identify her living out in California at a residence that belonged to one of Kelsey's friends. When she was apprehended, she was in the company of John Logan Kennison. We did not have a warrant for Kennison at that particular time, so they had to let him go.
Turner refuses to speak with investigators. But on April 4th, they receive new evidence that implicates both of her roommates in the murder as well.
The fingerprints that were gathered from the vehicle had been analyzed and came back belonging to Diana Pena and John Kennison.
With that, we established probable cause to get an arrest warrant for Diana and Kennison.
Both of them were charged with murder with use of a deadly weapon.
But a week later, Diana turns herself in, and in hopes of a deal, she agrees to tell her story from the beginning.
I met Kelsey from a friend of a friend, and then she asked me to move in not too long after that. I think she was very new to Vegas, so Dr. Burchard financed quite a bit of her expenses. She told me that he was like her sugar daddy. She would call him, message him, send him videos, and he would send her money. He was just a meal ticket. She called him her whale.
Coming up, Diana's interview provides shocking insight.
There were messages about taking her son away from her.
And possible motives are revealed.
He told me they were going to kill him, and that he hopes that they don't kill me too.
On April 13th, 2019, detectives sit down with Diana Pena, who says when Dr. Thomas Burchard showed up in Vegas on March 1st, Kelsey Turner knew he was there to end their arrangement.
Kelsey had told me probably about a month before he had come out that he was talking about cutting her off, but he was having a hard time actually doing it. She kind of had control over him. And Dr. Burchard said that Kelsey needed a lot of help. He said that he loved Kelsey, but she needs to get her life together, stuff like that.
According to Pena, it led to heated arguments between the two, which she experienced firsthand the day after Thomas arrived.
The next morning, I went to work. Kelsey messaged me and she's like, "Can you please come home early? I'm upset." And she said she would come pick me up. I got in the car, I was in the back seat. Kelsey was in the front seat. Dr. Burchard was driving. So Kelsey took Dr. Burchard's phone and was trying to do the GPS. And while she was on his phone, she kind of looked through his messages and seen messages between him and her mother about taking her son away from her.
Pena says the discovery caused Turner to snap.
She was kicking him, hitting him, screaming at him. Eventually, we did make it back to the house. Dr. Burchard went up to the room that he was staying in and just shut the door.
Fearing the situation might escalate, Pena asked a friend to take Kelsey's child, who was at the home, to a hotel. Hours later, her intuition proved correct.
After he went upstairs, Kelsey would randomly go up there and start screaming at him. And then Kennison would go up there and start screaming at him. And then I would tell them to go downstairs and calm down. Eventually, she yelled at Kennison to knock Dr. Burchard out. And Kennison ran upstairs, broke down the door. I'm not sure where the bat came from, but I knew he had a bat. You could hear it. At that point, I ran upstairs into the room, and I just kind of tried to get Kennison to get off of Burchard. I told Dr. Burchard to stay on the floor because his left eye was like filled with blood. He said he needed to go to the hospital and offered to say that he had been mugged. I helped him downstairs, kind of helped him clean up.
Pena says early the next morning, Turner and Kennison eventually agreed to take Thomas to the emergency room.
I helped him into the backseat of Kelsey's car. Dr. Burchard said he wanted his coat. So Kelsey and Kennison went back into the house. That's when he told me they were going to kill him and that he hopes that they don't kill me too. I just told him that's not going to happen. They're taking you to the hospital. Why would they kill you? And then Kelsey came back into the garage and she told me to go into the house and clean. So I went back into the house and I was cleaning. I started hearing Kelsey screaming again. She was calling Kennison a bitch and to knock Dr. Burchard out. So I came running down the stairs and told her to stop.
But Pena says she was too late.
Kennison had a gun that was covered in blood. Kelsey told me that that was what he used to beat the doctor's face. I was like, is everything okay? And she's like, he's dead. I was pretty scared and just not sure what to do.
Terrified that Thomas was right and she might be next, Pena went with Turner and Kennison to a hotel to hide out.
Kennison left with the car with the body in there to drive her car somewhere and do something with it. We sat in the hotel room for days. Kelsey was constantly Googling, turning on the news, and she had seen on the news that the car had been discovered. They just knew that, it's Kelsey's car, it's her sugar daddy in the trunk. Like, Kelsey was freaking out, knowing it's very easy to connect those dots.
Diana Pena says the plan was for all of them to flee the state, but she decided to turn herself in.
After the interview, she was booked into Clark County Detention Center on her warrant.
When they put me in a jail cell, that's probably when I felt the most safe. Because who's gonna break into a jail to hurt somebody?
She confirmed a lot of things that we already knew and opened our eyes on a lot of other things.
I assumed I would have to testify at some point. I was there. So it was the right thing to do.
It's been a month since Dr. Thomas Burchard was found murdered. And Las Vegas police have 2 of their 3 suspects in custody.
Kelsey Turner has acquired legal representation. Diana Pena went to police to help them piece together exactly what happened. But the other man who's involved here, John Kennison, is still out on the loose.
We established through fingerprints on the bat probable cause for Kennison. So based on that, we had an arrest warrant. The CATS team was looking for him using his phone.
They determined that John, in fact, returned from California to Las Vegas, went back to his mom's house, and that's where the authorities were able to locate and apprehend him.
Like Turner, Kennison refuses to talk. But Pena agrees to plead guilty to being an accessory and testify against the other 2.
I was sentenced to 3 years of probation and a felony accessory.
I don't harbor any ill feelings towards her. I wish she had called 911, but I do understand that she was very frightened and probably in shock. And I believe Kelsey Turner probably was using her just like she used everybody.
In May 2022, 3 years after Dr. Thomas Burchard's murder, Kennison decides to plead guilty as well.
Logan is accepting full responsibility for his actions. He knows that he committed a terrible crime, and he is remorseful for that.
The total sentence, the aggregate sentence, will be 18 to 45 years in the Nevada Department of Corrections.
Later that year, Kelsey Turner makes a deal of her own.
Do you understand you're being charged with second-degree murder?
Yes, ma'am.
How do you plead to that charge? Guilty pursuant to Alford or not guilty?
Guilty pursuant to Alford.
To explain an Alford plea, you're not confessing to it. You're just acknowledging that the state has enough evidence to convict you of it.
Ms. Turner, in accordance with the laws of the state of Nevada, you're hereby judged guilty of second-degree murder, a felony. You're hereby sentenced to 10 to 25 years in the Nevada Department of Corrections.
In the initial court hearings, she's smiling and laughing and posing for the cameras. Even if she was not guilty, somebody that you knew was murdered. That's just evil. Just evil.
I never realized such evil existed in this world until this happened. Physically, it has been very difficult for me. The emotional turmoil I have experienced was and is literally gut-wrenching.
No matter what Dr. Bouchard's motivations were for trying to help a single mom in need, it's just terrible that someone who had helped so many people in his life and seemed to only try to help people in his life ended up paying the ultimate price for it.
I think Kelsey Turner is a danger to society. Honestly, I don't think she should ever get out of prison.
The call comes in before sunrise, when the world is still quiet enough for secrets to feel heavier, a voice low, uneven, carrying the weight of something buried for years, a detail so precise it cuts through. Nearly 2 decades of silence, and just like that, a cold case that had long been considered dead begins to move again, slowly at first, then with a force no one inside that investigation room was prepared for. Florida, summer, 2007. Heat that sticks to your skin, roads that stretch endlessly through scrubland and scattered trees, pockets of darkness where headlights vanish and time seems to pause. It was supposed to be an ordinary night, the kind that disappears without leaving a trace, but something happened out there, something that refused to stay buried, no matter how many years passed. She leaves her house at 9:12 p.m. That number becomes important later, frozen in a grainy security camera frame that investigators would replay again and again, searching for meaning in every pixel, every shadow, every flicker of light. At the time, it meant nothing. Just another timestamp in a routine evening. No one watching that footage knew they were looking at the last confirmed moment she was ever seen alive. Her route was familiar. She had driven it countless times before.
No detours, no deviations.
No reason for concern, until the pattern broke. Her car is found hours later, miles away from where it should have been, parked at an angle that feels wrong the moment you see it. The engine is off. The interior is still. The driver's door is not fully closed. It hangs there, slightly open, as if interrupted mid-motion. There is no immediate sign of violence. No shattered glass.
No obvious struggle.
Just absence. Just silence pressing in from all sides. The first officers on scene describe it in a way that stays with the case for years. Not chaotic. Not frantic. Just staged, though no one uses that word officially. Something about the placement. The stillness. The lack of disorder where disorder should exist. It feels controlled. Intentional. As if whoever was responsible understood exactly how to leave just enough behind to avoid drawing attention, and just little enough to erase themselves. The investigation moves fast in those early hours. It always does. Every minute matters. Every second counts. Officers canvass the area. Flashlights cut through the dark, sweeping across dirt, grass, tree lines. Nothing. No footprints that lead anywhere. No discarded items. No witnesses who saw anything unusual. It's as if the night swallowed everything whole.
Her phone goes silent.
No calls. No messages. No final signal that could anchor her to a specific place or moment. Digital silence, complete and absolute. For investigators, that silence is louder than any scream. Neighbors are questioned. Friends are interviewed. Co-workers are brought in one by one, asked the same questions from different angles, hoping something will crack, something will slip, something will connect. But every answer leads to another dead end. Every lead dissolves under scrutiny. The timeline is built, then rebuilt, then questioned again. At 10:03 p.m., a possible sighting. A vehicle matching the description of hers seen near a gas station several miles from the recovery site. Grainy footage, indistinct shapes, a driver that could be anyone. It goes nowhere. At 10:47 p.m., a report of raised voices in a nearby area. A potential argument. Investigators chase it hard. Days later, it's dismissed. Unrelated. Each lead feels promising for a moment, then collapses. And with each collapse, the case loses momentum. Days turn into weeks. The search expands, then contracts. Volunteers comb through wooded areas. K-9 units track scents that vanish without explanation. Helicopters scan from above, their searchlights sweeping across terrain that offers no answers. The community watches, holds its breath, waits for something, anything, to break. But nothing does. The language begins to change. Missing person becomes foul play suspected. Active investigation becomes no significant developments. And eventually, inevitably, the phrase that seals everything into a kind of quiet resignation: cold case. Files are boxed. Evidence is cataloged. The urgency fades, replaced by routine. For most, the case becomes a memory. For some, it becomes an obsession. For the investigators who worked it, it becomes something unfinished, something that lingers long after they've moved on to other cases. But even then, there are details that never sit right. The position of the car. The absence of any real disturbance. The gaps in the timeline that refuse to align, no matter how many times they are revisited. It's as if a piece of the puzzle was always missing, and without it, the picture could never come into focus. Years pass. The road remains unchanged. The trees grow taller, denser. New residents move in, unaware of what happened there, unaware that they pass by a place where a life vanished without explanation. But for those who remember, the unease never fully disappears. It lingers in conversations that resurface late at night, in glances exchanged when the topic comes up, in the quiet understanding that something about that case was never resolved. And then, nearly 20 years later, the silence breaks. A call. A new witness. Not someone who discovered something recently. Not a passerby who stumbled onto evidence. Someone who was there. Someone who saw something in 2007 and chose not to speak. Someone who carried that silence for years, until the weight of it became impossible to ignore. The initial statement is hesitant, fragmented. Memory distorted by time, by fear, by doubt. But within that hesitation, there are details that do not exist anywhere in the original file. Details that could not have been fabricated without knowledge of the scene. A second vehicle. Not documented. Not logged. Not mentioned in any of the original reports. Parked just beyond the main area, partially obscured, positioned in a way that would avoid immediate detection. Engine running. That detail alone is enough to change everything. Because if there was another vehicle, then someone else was present. If someone else was present, then the original timeline is incomplete. And if the timeline is incomplete, then every conclusion drawn from it is now questionable. Investigators reopen the case. Old boxes are pulled from storage. Dust disturbed for the first time in years. Evidence is re-examined under new light, with new technology, with new perspective. What once seemed insignificant is now scrutinized. What was once dismissed is now reconsidered. Photographs are spread across tables. Angles analyzed. Shadows studied. Tiny inconsistencies that once meant nothing now stand out, demanding attention. Audio recordings from past interviews are replayed. Voices from 2007 fill the room again, statements that once felt routine now carrying a different tone, a different weight. A hesitation here, a contradiction there. Subtle, almost invisible at the time, now impossible to ignore. The investigation begins to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. A witness who once claimed certainty now appears unsure under renewed questioning. A timeline once considered solid begins to fracture under pressure. A minor detail, buried deep in a report, suddenly aligns with a new testimony in a way that cannot be dismissed as coincidence. It's not a solution.
Not yet.
But it's movement. And in a case that has been frozen for nearly 2 decades, movement is everything. The detectives assigned to the reopened case inherit more than just files. They inherit the weight of every unanswered question, every missed opportunity, every moment where the truth might have been within reach, but slipped away. They return to the scene. The same road.
The same stretch of land.
But it feels different now. Not because it has changed, but because they are seeing it through a different lens. Through the possibility that something was there all along, hidden in plain sight. The car becomes the focal point again. Processed once more. Examined with technology that didn't exist in 2007. Trace evidence is sought where none was found before. Fibers. Residue. Microscopic fragments that might have survived time, waiting to be discovered. And as they dig deeper, a quiet realization begins to take shape.
Something was missed.
Not ignored. Not covered up. Just missed. A presence. A moment. A detail that didn't fit the narrative at the time and was therefore pushed aside. But now, with the new witness, that detail refuses to stay buried. The question becomes unavoidable. Who else was there that night? And why did no one see them? Or, worse, why did someone see them and choose silence? The case begins to make noise again. At first, it's contained within the investigation. Then it spreads. Whispers in the community. Old conversations reignited. Names resurfacing after years of being forgotten. Rumors that once seemed baseless now re-examined under a new light. And with each passing day, the sense grows stronger. This was never random. It never was. Because random leaves chaos. Random leaves mistakes. Random leaves something behind.
But this
was controlled. Calculated. Deliberate. And if that's true, then someone out there has lived with this for nearly 20 years. Watched as the case faded. Listened as the questions died down. Believed, perhaps, that it was over. That they were safe. That whatever happened on that road in 2007 would remain there, buried in darkness, untouched, forgotten. But now, the past is moving again. And this time, it's not letting go. The room feels different now, heavier, charged with something that wasn't there before, as if the case itself has shifted from memory into something alive again, something watching, something waiting. And every investigator inside that space can feel it, even if no one says it out loud, because this is what happens when a cold case wakes up, everything you thought you knew begins to fall apart. The new witness sits under controlled light, not harsh, not aggressive, just enough to expose hesitation, enough to reveal the flickers of doubt that pass across a face when memory and fear collide. And the first thing the detectives notice is not what is said, but what isn't, the pauses, the moments where the story slows, where something presses against the surface but doesn't fully emerge. They start simple. Where were you? A location. Vague at first, then refined under pressure. Close enough to the scene to matter. Too close to be coincidence. What did you see? Silence. Then fragments. A road.
Headlights.
A shape where no shape should be. Another vehicle, positioned off-angle, not parked like someone stopping briefly, but placed with intent, partially concealed by brush, as if whoever drove it there understood sight lines, understood how to disappear without actually leaving. The engine running. That detail comes back again, repeated, not imagined, not uncertain. The witness is clear on that part. The low vibration, the sound carrying through the still night air. Detectives exchange a look. Because engines running mean readiness. It means whoever was there didn't plan to stay long. It means this wasn't spontaneous. It was prepared. The timeline shifts immediately. They lay out the original sequence, every minute accounted for as best as 2007 allowed, then they overlay the new statement on top of it, watching where it aligns, where it conflicts, where it breaks everything open. There's a gap. A narrow window of time where the victim's vehicle is unaccounted for, a period that was previously dismissed as travel delay, traffic variation, normal unpredictability. Now it becomes something else. A moment where two vehicles occupy the same stretch of darkness. A moment where paths intersect. A moment where something irreversible happens. The questioning deepens. Did you see anyone? Another pause. Longer this time. The kind that fills the room, stretches it, forces everyone to wait. Then. Movement. Not clear, not direct. A silhouette. A figure near the driver's side. Another shape closer to the second vehicle. Two people. Possibly three. The witness isn't sure. Memory blurs under stress, under time, under the weight of knowing that whatever they saw might be the missing piece to something that has haunted an entire community.
But even uncertainty is something.
Because before this, there was nothing. No second vehicle. No additional figures. No indication that the victim was not alone. And now, suddenly, the scene is crowded with possibilities. Detectives push further, careful not to contaminate the memory, careful not to lead, because once a memory is altered, even slightly, it becomes unreliable, and in a case like this, reliability is everything. Why didn't you come forward? The question hangs there, sharp, unavoidable. The answer doesn't come immediately. When it does, it's quiet.
Fear.
Not of the police. Not of being wrong. Fear of being seen. Fear of being connected. Fear of something that felt bigger than a simple crime, something that suggested consequences for speaking out. That answer changes the temperature in the room. Because fear implies presence. It implies that whatever happened that night wasn't just violent, it was controlled in a way that made witnesses hesitate, in a way that made silence feel safer than truth. And that means whoever was involved didn't just act, they influenced. They left an impression strong enough to last nearly 20 years. The investigation expands again. Not outward, but inward. Back into the original case files, but this time looking for what wasn't obvious, what didn't stand out, what may have been dismissed because it didn't fit the narrative at the time. Old witness statements are reanalyzed. Patterns begin to emerge. Small inconsistencies. Minor contradictions. Nothing strong enough to build a case on before. But now, with the new testimony, they begin to align. A report of an unfamiliar vehicle in the area that was logged but never followed up. A neighbor who mentioned hearing an engine idling late at night but assumed it was nothing. A passing comment about lights off the road, partially obscured by trees. Each detail, on its own, insignificant, together, forming something else. Something that looks like a presence. Something that looks like planning. The detectives map it out visually. Boards filled with photos, timelines, notes connected by lines that crisscross in every direction, a web of information that is slowly tightening, drawing inward toward a point that has yet to fully reveal itself. They return to the physical evidence. The car. Reprocessed again, more thoroughly this time. Every surface examined under conditions far more advanced than what was available in 2007. Latent prints enhanced. Fibers isolated. Particles analyzed. Time has degraded some of it, but not all. And sometimes what survives is enough. There's a trace. Not immediately identifiable, but foreign. Not belonging to the victim. Not matching anything in the original database. Back then, it would have meant nothing. Now, it becomes a focal point. Because now, they know she wasn't alone. The search for the second vehicle begins in earnest. Old registration records. Traffic data. Anything that could place another car in that area during that window of time. It's like chasing a shadow. Too many possibilities. Too many unknowns. But one thing becomes clear quickly. If that vehicle was there, it didn't arrive by accident. It was placed. Positioned. Used. Which means whoever was behind it had intent. And intent leaves patterns. Even if those patterns are buried under years of noise. The witness is brought back in. More questions. More details. The memory sharpens in some places, fades in others. But one element remains consistent. The feeling. The sense that something was wrong. Not just unusual. Not just unexpected. Wrong in a way that made them leave. In a way that made them not look back. In a way that convinced them at the time that staying silent was the safest option. That instinct matters. Because instinct doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from perception. From subtle cues. From things the brain registers before the mind fully understands. Which means there was something about that scene, something about the people present, that signaled danger beyond the immediate. The kind of danger that lingers. The kind that follows. The kind that waits. As the investigation deepens, another realization begins to take shape, one that is harder to ignore with each passing day. This wasn't chaotic. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't a crime of opportunity. Everything about it suggests control. Timing. Placement. Execution. Even the absence of evidence begins to feel intentional. As if the scene was designed to reveal nothing. To stall. To confuse.
To buy time.
And it worked. For years it worked. The case went cold. The questions faded. The silence held. But now, that silence is breaking. And with it, the illusion that whatever happened that night was simple. It wasn't simple. It wasn't random. It wasn't isolated. Because now there are too many moving parts. Too many elements that suggest coordination. Too many details that point to more than one person. Which leads to the question that no one wants to say too soon, but everyone is thinking. If there was more than one person, then who were they? And how did they stay invisible for so long? The community begins to feel it again. That old unease. That quiet tension that settles over conversations, over familiar places, over routines that suddenly don't feel as safe as they once did. Because when a case like this reopens, it doesn't just revisit the past. It disrupts the present. People start remembering things they thought they had forgotten. Moments that didn't make sense at the time. Encounters that fell off. Details that were dismissed because there was no context for them. Now there is. And with context comes fear. Because if the truth was always there, just hidden beneath the surface, then it means it was never really gone. It was waiting. Just like the case. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for the right voice. Waiting for someone to finally say what they saw. And now that someone has, there is no putting it back. No returning to silence. No pretending it didn't happen. Because the moment that second vehicle entered the story, everything changed. The moment the second vehicle becomes real, not rumor, not speculation, but a confirmed variable inside the investigation, the entire case shifts into a different category, no longer a disappearance wrapped in silence, but a controlled event with structure, with presence, with intent, and that realization spreads through the task force like a quiet shockwave, changing how every piece of evidence is viewed, how every past decision is judged, how every unanswered question now feels heavier than before. They go back to the timeline again, not to rebuild it but to break it apart, to strip it down to raw fragments and reassemble it without assumptions, without the narrative that guided the original investigation, because now they know that narrative was incomplete, maybe even misleading, shaped by what was visible while something critical remained just out of sight. 9:12 p.m. Departure. That stays fixed. That has always been the anchor. But everything after that begins to stretch, distort, lose certainty. There is a window, small but significant, where movement cannot be confirmed, where her vehicle exists only as a possibility between 2 points, and now, within that gap, the second vehicle lives, idling in darkness, waiting. They overlay geographic data, mapping distances, calculating travel time with precision, factoring in speed, road conditions, possible stops, and one thing becomes clear almost immediately: the meeting point, if it was a meeting, was not random. It sits in a zone that offers limited visibility, minimal traffic, natural cover. Not hidden completely, but obscured enough. A place you wouldn't choose by accident. A place you would choose if you knew the area. That detail narrows the field. Local knowledge. Familiarity. Someone who had been there before. Someone who understood how that road behaves at night, how light falls, how sound carries. The detectives begin compiling a list, not suspects yet, but individuals connected to the victim who fit that profile, people who knew her routines, people who had access to her schedule, people who could predict where she would be without needing to follow. Because following leaves traces. Planning does not. They revisit her last known interactions. Phone logs. Messages. Conversations that seemed ordinary at the time now dissected for subtext, for tone, for anything that suggests arrangement, tension, expectation. One message stands out. Short. Neutral. Easily overlooked. But its timing places it dangerously close to the moment everything changed. No explicit content. No clear instruction. But enough ambiguity to raise questions. Was it coordination? Or coincidence? They don't know yet. But it doesn't get dismissed this time. Nothing does. The second vehicle becomes an obsession. They reconstruct it from memory, from the witness's fragmented description, from what little can be inferred. Color uncertain. Make unknown. Shape indistinct. But size approximate. Not a large truck. Not a compact. Something in between. Common enough to blend in. Unremarkable enough to avoid attention. Which makes it harder. Because now it could be anyone. Anywhere. At any time. They pull old traffic citations, patrol logs, anything that might have recorded a vehicle in that area that night, even indirectly. Thousands of entries. Most irrelevant. Some questionable. Each one checked, cross-referenced, eliminated. The process is slow, methodical, exhausting, but necessary. Because somewhere in that noise, there could be a pattern. And patterns lead to people. Meanwhile, the witness's account continues to evolve, not in contradiction, but in depth, as if memory, once unlocked, begins to reveal more layers, more fragments that were suppressed or ignored. There's a moment they return to repeatedly. The pause. The gap between seeing the first vehicle and noticing the second. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't obvious. Which means the second vehicle was placed deliberately out of direct sight line. Not hidden completely. Just enough. Enough to delay recognition. Enough to create a false impression of isolation. That level of placement suggests awareness. Not just of the environment, but of perception.
Of how people see.
Of how people miss things. And that detail changes the profile. This is no longer just someone familiar with the area. This is someone who understands behavior, who anticipates reaction, who plans for oversight. The investigators don't say it out loud yet, but the thought is there, forming, growing stronger with each new connection. This was orchestrated. They returned to the physical scene once more, this time not just as investigators, but as observers of movement, reconstructing positions, angles, visibility, placing themselves where the witness stood, where the vehicles would have been, tracing lines of sight, calculating what could and could not be seen at different distances, under different lighting conditions. They run simulations.
Headlights on.
Headlights off. Engine running. Engine silent. Each variation tells a slightly different story. But one version aligns more than the others. The second vehicle arrives first. Positions itself.
Waits.
The victim arrives second.
Stops.
Interaction occurs.
Brief.
Controlled. Then something shifts. Something forces movement. The door opens. Not casually. Abruptly. And after that, the sequence becomes unclear again. Because that's where the evidence ends. That's where visibility breaks. That's where the night takes over. But even that partial reconstruction is enough to create pressure. Because it implies prearrangement. It implies intent. It implies that whoever was in that second vehicle was not reacting. They were waiting. The team expands the scope again, not geographically but socially, digging deeper into connections that were previously considered too distant to matter, acquaintances of acquaintances, indirect links, people who intersected with the victim's life in small, almost invisible ways. Because sometimes the closest connection is the least obvious. They begin to see intersections. Subtle. Scattered. But present. Individuals who share proximity to both the victim and the area. People who had reasons to be nearby. Reasons that seemed unrelated before. Now less so. Nothing concrete.
Not yet.
But enough to keep digging. And as they dig, another unsettling pattern emerges. Several of those individuals had been questioned in 2007. Briefly. Surface level. Cleared without deep scrutiny. At the time, it made sense. No evidence tied them to the scene. No reason to push further. Now, with the second vehicle in play, those decisions feel different. Not wrong, but incomplete. And incomplete investigations leave gaps. Gaps that someone could slip through. The detectives start bringing those names back in.
Carefully.
Quietly.
No accusations.
Just conversations. revisiting old ground with new questions. And almost immediately they notice something. Discomfort. Not overt. Not obvious. But present. Subtle shifts in tone. In posture. In how answers are delivered. Some remember clearly. Too clearly. Others struggle. Claiming time has erased details. Which is expected. But not always believable. Because memory fades unevenly. And when it fades too conveniently, it raises questions. One interview stands out. A man who had no direct connection to the victim, at least not on paper, but whose proximity to the area places him within range, whose original statement was brief, almost dismissive, now feels rehearsed. He repeats himself. Uses the same phrasing. Avoids specifics. And when pressed, becomes defensive in a way that doesn't match the question. It's not evidence. But it's something. Something that gets noted. Something that doesn't get forgotten this time. The case is no longer quiet. Internally, it's building momentum. Externally, the community begins to feel the shift again. Old headlines resurface. The words "cold case reopened" echo through local media. People start talking. Remembering.
Questioning.
And with that attention comes risk. Because whoever was involved, if they're still out there, now knows the case is active again.
Now knows something has changed.
Now knows that the silence they relied on is no longer guaranteed. And that changes behavior. People watch more closely. Speak more carefully. Disappear more deliberately. Or they make mistakes. And investigators are waiting for that. Because cases like this don't always break from evidence alone. Sometimes they break from pressure. From time. From the slow tightening of a net that no one realizes is closing until it's too late. Back in the evidence room, the trace sample from the vehicle is reprocessed again, pushed through more advanced analysis, compared against expanded databases that didn't exist years ago, and this time, the result doesn't come back empty. It's not a full match.
Not yet.
But it's closer. Close enough to suggest a direction. A possible origin. A category. Something that narrows the field just enough to matter. And suddenly, the second vehicle isn't just a shadow anymore. It's connected.
Faintly.
Indirectly. But connected. And once a connection exists, it can be followed. Tracked. Expanded. The investigators don't celebrate.
Not yet.
Because they know how fragile the stage is. How easily it can collapse. How quickly hope can turn back into silence. But they also know something else now. This case was never empty. It was never without answers. It was just waiting for the right angle. The right detail. The right voice to break through the noise. And now that it has, the picture is starting to form. Not clearly. Not completely. But enough to see its outline. Enough to understand its shape. Enough to realize that what happened on that road in 2007 was not a moment. It was a plan. And plans leave traces. Even after all this time. The moment a trace begins to point somewhere, anywhere, the entire investigation tightens, focus sharpening, noise filtering out, every decision now guided by the possibility that the case is no longer drifting but converging, slowly, dangerously, towards something real, something that has been hidden in plain sight for nearly 20 years. The lab report doesn't scream certainty. It doesn't deliver a name, an address, a clean resolution. It offers something far more unsettling, a partial profile, a material composition linked to a specific category, something manufactured, something distributed, something that exists in thousands of places and yet, under the right lens, narrows into something far smaller. It's enough. Enough to begin aligning the physical with the theoretical. Enough to test the growing suspicion that the second vehicle was not just present, but purposeful in a way that extends beyond that single night. They go back to the scene again, not physically this time, but digitally, reconstructing it in layers, building a model of movement, of timing, of presence, feeding in every known variable, every assumption now stripped and reevaluated, watching how the sequence plays out under different conditions. Each version tells a slightly different story, but one version begins to repeat. Consistently. The second vehicle arrives early. Too early to be coincidence. It waits. Not circling, not passing through, but waiting in a fixed position, engine idling low, lights minimized, angled just enough to remain partially concealed from the main road. That's not hesitation. That's preparation. And preparation implies knowledge. Knowledge of her schedule. Knowledge of her route. Knowledge of exactly where she would be and when. Which brings the investigation back to her life, not the public version, not the surface-level connections already exhausted years ago, but the deeper structure, the subtle rhythms, the patterns that only a few people would recognize. They rebuild her final days. Every interaction. Every deviation. Every moment that felt insignificant at the time. And within that reconstruction, something begins to emerge. Not a single event. Not a dramatic shift. But a pattern of small changes. Slight alterations in routine. Shorter conversations. A message left unanswered longer than usual. A canceled plan that didn't seem important. At the time, none of it mattered. Now it suggests something else. Pressure. Not visible. Not overt. But present. As if something or someone was already influencing her behavior before that night. The team leans into that possibility. They re-examine her communication logs not just for content, but for rhythm, for tone, for the spaces between messages, for what isn't said as much as what is. One number appears more often than it should. Not frequent enough to stand out immediately. Not rare enough to ignore. Intermittent. Inconsistent. Almost cautious. The kind of contact that avoids patterns. The kind that tries not to be noticed. It wasn't flagged in 2007. There was no reason to. No explicit connection. No alarming content. But now, with everything shifting, it becomes something else.
A thread. Thin.
Fragile. But real. They trace it. Subscriber records. Service history. Ownership changes. The line doesn't stay with one person.
It moves.
Passed between accounts. Disconnected. Reconnected. Each transition creating distance, creating ambiguity. But one segment holds. Long enough. Stable enough. To attach to a name. Not a suspect.
Not yet.
Just a name. Someone who existed on the edge of her world. Not close enough to be obvious. Not distant enough to be irrelevant. Someone who had access, but not visibility. Someone who could observe without being observed. They bring the name into the room. Lay it next to the others.
Compare.
Cross-reference. And slowly, connections begin to form. Not direct. Not clean. But present. Shared locations. Overlapping time frames. Moments where proximity becomes difficult to dismiss as coincidence. And then another detail surfaces.
Small.
Buried deep in an old report. A mention of a vehicle seen in the general area days before the incident. At the time, it was dismissed. No reason to connect it. No context. Now, with the second vehicle confirmed, it becomes something else entirely. Prepositioning. Testing. Familiarization. Someone learning the environment. Learning how to move within it without being noticed. That changes the scale. This wasn't just planned for that night. It was built. Over time. Quietly.
Carefully.
The investigators feel it now. That slow tightening of understanding. The sense that they are no longer chasing something abstract, but something constructed, something deliberate, something that exists not just in theory, but in reality, somewhere beyond the walls of the investigation room. They return to the witness again. Not to push. Not to force new information. But to confirm. To stabilize what is already there. They show reconstructions. Angles. Positions. Ask simple questions. Does this feel right? Does this match what you remember? And the answers come quicker now. More certain. Less hesitation. Because once a memory is anchored to something tangible, it becomes easier to hold on to. Easier to trust.
Yes.
That angle. That placement. That distance. And then, a new detail. Unprompted.
Small.
But precise. A light. Not from the vehicle. From inside it.
Brief.
Flickering. As if something was being checked. Or handled. Or observed. That detail adds another layer. Because now the second vehicle isn't just waiting. It's active. Occupied. Aware. And that awareness suggests timing. Coordination. A moment when everything aligned. They go back to the timeline again. Overlay the new detail. And suddenly, the gap narrows even further. The window of interaction becomes tighter. More controlled. Less chaotic. Everything pointing to a sequence that was not left to chance. Back in the lab, the partial trace continues to evolve. More data. More refinement. The category narrows again. From broad to specific. From common to less so. And within that narrowing, a link begins to form between the material and a type of vehicle interior, a manufacturing batch, a period of distribution. Still not enough to identify a single source. But enough to reduce the field. Enough to say with confidence, whoever was in that second vehicle was not just present, they left something behind. Something that survived time. Something that is now speaking. The investigators follow that lead into records, into databases, into anything that connects that material to ownership, to location, to presence within a relevant radius during that period. It's not fast. It's not clean. But it's moving. And movement is what this case has lacked for nearly 2 decades. Meanwhile, the person attached to that intermittent phone number begins to take shape.
Background. History.
Connections. Nothing overtly criminal. Nothing that immediately raises alarm. But patterns.
Subtle.
Consistent. Movement between places that align too closely with key locations. Timing that overlaps with critical windows. Not enough to accuse. But too much to ignore. They bring that individual back in. Not as a suspect. As a conversation. A re-interview. Routine on the surface. But beneath it, every word is measured, every reaction noted, every hesitation cataloged. The tone is calm, professional, but the tension is there. Because this time, the questions are different. This time, the investigators know more. Not everything, but enough to see when something doesn't fit. The answers come. Smooth. Controlled.
Familiar.
Too familiar. As if they've been practiced. As if they've been held in place for years, waiting for the moment they might be needed again. And when the timeline is presented, adjusted, updated, refined, there's a shift.
Small.
Almost invisible. But real. A fraction of a second where certainty falters. Where control slips. And then it's back.
Composed.
Neutral. But it was there. And that's enough. Because in cases like this, it's not the answers that reveal the truth. It's the moments where the answers don't come naturally. Where they have to be constructed. And construction leaves seams. The investigation is no longer searching blindly. It's circling. Slowly.
Carefully.
Around something that is beginning to take form. Not fully visible.
Not yet.
But close. Close enough that the air feels different. Close enough that the silence that protected this case for so long is starting to fracture. And somewhere beyond the reach of the investigation, someone feels it too. That shift. That pressure. That sense that what was buried is no longer staying buried. Because once a case like this starts to align, it doesn't stop. Not until something breaks. Pressure doesn't arrive all at once. It builds, quiet and incremental, a slow tightening that most people don't even notice until it's already too late. And inside this investigation, that pressure is everywhere now, in every room, in every conversation, in every piece of evidence that once felt static and now seems to shift under a different light, because the case is no longer drifting, it's narrowing, drawing inward towards something that has remained hidden for nearly 20 years. The name attached to the intermittent phone number refuses to go away. Not because it stands out dramatically, but because it doesn't disappear. Every time investigators try to move past it, to test other directions, it surfaces again, connected by small, almost invisible threads to places, to times, to moments that matter more now than they ever did before. It becomes a constant. A quiet presence inside the investigation. Not loud enough to accuse, but persistent enough to follow. They deepen the background check. Not just surface-level records. Not just criminal history. But patterns of life. Employment timelines. Geographic movement. Social connections that extend outward in widening circles. And within those circles, something begins to take shape. Not a clear picture, but a structure. A life that intersects with the victim's world in ways that were never obvious. Shared locations. Common routes. Moments where proximity becomes more than coincidence. And then something else.
A gap.
A period of time shortly after 2007 where this individual's life becomes less defined. Not missing. Not vanished. But blurred. Changes in employment. Relocation without clear explanation. A shift that doesn't align cleanly with what came before or after. At the time, it meant nothing. Now, it draws attention. Because people don't always disappear after something happens. Sometimes they adjust. They move just enough to create distance. Just enough to avoid being anchored to a specific place or moment. The investigators don't jump to conclusions. They can't. But they mark it. They keep it in focus. Because in a case built on fragments, even the smallest irregularity matters. Back in the lab, the material trace continues to refine. Each iteration narrowing the possibilities. Each comparison eliminating noise. The data begins to converge on a smaller subset of vehicles, specific enough to guide, not specific enough to confirm. But it's movement. And movement creates direction. They cross-reference ownership records within a defined radius during that time period, filtering through names, addresses, registrations, looking for overlap, looking for anything that intersects with the growing cluster of details they've assembled. And there it is again. The same name. Not directly. Not cleanly. But connected through a secondary listing. A vehicle registered under a different household, but with ties that are impossible to ignore. It's not proof. But it's proximity. And proximity, layered over everything else, begins to feel less like coincidence and more like alignment. They bring the file together. Everything. The witness statement. The second vehicle. The trace material. The phone records. The geographic overlap. The behavioral inconsistencies. Laid out side by side, it doesn't scream guilt. It doesn't resolve into a clear accusation. But it points in one direction. And that direction is becoming harder to ignore. The team debates internally.
Carefully.
Because this is the moment where investigations can either sharpen or fracture. Push too hard, too fast, and the structure collapses. Move too slowly, and the opportunity slips away. They choose pressure. Not overt. Not aggressive. But controlled. Targeted. They re-engage. Another interview. Same individual. Same calm tone. Same measured approach. But this time, the questions are different. More specific. More grounded. Less open. They begin with neutral ground. Re-establish baseline. Then gradually they introduce elements. Locations.
Times.
Connections. Watching. Always watching. For the shift. For the moment where the narrative strains. And it comes. Not immediately. Not dramatically.
But subtly.
A correction that wasn't necessary. A clarification offered too quickly. A detail inserted where none was asked for. Those are the moments investigators look for. Because truth doesn't need reinforcement. Only constructed stories do. They pivot. Introduce the idea of the second vehicle. Not as a fact. As a possibility. Gauge the reaction. And there it is again. That fraction of a second. That micropause where the brain recalculates. Where something internal adjusts. It's gone almost instantly. Replaced by dismissal. By distance. By a statement that feels practiced.
But the pause happened.
And once it happens, it can't be unseen. They end the interview without confrontation. Without accusation. Because it's not time.
Not yet.
But the direction is now clear. They return to the witness. One more time. Not to change the story. But to reinforce it. To anchor it. They present a refined reconstruction. Angles adjusted. Positions clarified. Distances measured. And again, the confirmation comes.
Yes.
That's closer. That's what it felt like. And then another fragment surfaces.
A sound.
Not mechanical. Not environmental. A voice.
Faint.
Indistinct, but present. Not a conversation. Not words that can be repeated, but tone.
Sharp.
Controlled. The kind of tone that suggests authority.
Command.
That detail changes something fundamental. Because now, the scene isn't just physical. It's dynamic. Interactive. There was communication.
Direction.
Which means someone was in control. And someone else was responding. Multiple people. Multiple roles. The idea solidifies. This wasn't a single act. It was coordinated. The investigators expand outward again. Not randomly, but along the lines that now define the case. People connected to the emerging name. Associates. Friends. Co-workers. Anyone who intersects within a relevant time frame. And within that network, patterns begin to echo. Not identical, but similar enough. Movements that align. Locations that overlap. Moments where two or more individuals share space in ways that were never examined before. Each connection thin, but together, forming something stronger. A possibility that what happened that night involved more than one person. More than one decision. More than one set of hands. The pressure increases. Quietly. Systematically. Records are pulled. Movements tracked. Timelines compared across individuals, not just the victim. And as those timelines begin to align, the structure becomes clearer. There was presence before the night. Movement leading up to it. Positioning. And then absence. After. A withdrawal. A dispersal. As if whatever needed to happen was completed, and then everything returned to normal. On the surface. But not beneath. Because beneath, the traces remained. Scattered. Disconnected.
Until now.
Now they're being pulled together. Connected. Aligned. The investigators can feel it. That edge. That point where a case transitions from theory to reality. From possibility to something that can be acted on. But they also know the risk. Because once that line is crossed, there's no return. No more observation. No more quiet analysis. Only action. And action requires certainty. They're not there yet. But they're closer than this case has ever been. Closer than anyone in 2007 could have imagined. Closer than the person or people responsible ever expected. Because time was supposed to protect them. Silence was supposed to shield them. Distance was supposed to erase them. But none of it worked. Not completely. Not permanently. Because something was left behind. A detail. A witness. A trace. And now, all of it is coming back. Not all at once. But piece by piece. Relentless. Unstoppable. And somewhere someone is starting to feel it. That shift in the air. That tightening of the world around them. That sense that the past is no longer behind them. It's catching up. And this time, there's nowhere left to hide. By the time the pressure becomes visible, it's already too late to contain it, because what was once a quiet re-examination has now evolved into something far more focused, far more dangerous, a convergence of fragments that are no longer drifting, but locking into place one after another, forming a structure that feels increasingly difficult to deny, and inside that structure, the same patterns keep repeating, the same names surfacing, the same connections tightening with every pass. The investigative team doesn't rush it. They can't. They've seen cases like this fracture under premature certainty, seen how fragile momentum can collapse if pushed too far, too fast, so instead, they let it build, slowly, deliberately, allowing each new piece to settle before introducing the next, creating a pressure that doesn't explode but compresses, steadily, until something gives. The individual tied to the phone records becomes central, not officially, not on paper, but in practice, in discussion, in the quiet exchanges between detectives who now recognize the gravity of the alignment forming around that name. Because it's no longer just proximity, no longer just coincidence, it's repetition, consistency across multiple layers of the case, and repetition in an investigation like this is never ignored. They begin reconstructing that person's movements in 2007 with far greater precision than before. Cell tower pings, work schedules, fuel purchases, any measurable data point that can anchor presence to time and place. Back then, the data was limited, fragmented, easy to dismiss. Now, with enhanced recovery techniques and cross-referencing tools, those fragments become more stable, more usable, forming a rough outline of movement that, while incomplete, begins to intersect with the critical window of that night. It's not a direct hit, not a definitive placement at the scene, but it's close. Close enough to keep them in frame. Close enough to prevent dismissal. And in an investigation driven by accumulation, that matters. They widen the scope to include known associates, people who had regular contact during that period, individuals who could have provided support, presence, or simply reinforcement of an alibi that, until now, had never been seriously challenged. One name emerges more prominently than the others. Not because of a direct link to the victim, but because of proximity to the primary individual. Frequent contact. Shared locations. Overlapping schedules that align too neatly to ignore. Two people. Moving within the same orbit. Both unremarkable in isolation. Together beginning to form something else. The possibility of coordination. That possibility changes the strategy. Because one person can be cautious. Two people can create structure. They revisit earlier interviews involving both individuals. Old recordings. Transcripts. Statements that once seemed independent now replayed side by side, compared not just for content, but for rhythm, for phrasing, for subtle similarities that suggest alignment. And there it is. Small, almost imperceptible, but real. Shared language. Mirrored responses. The same framing of certain details, repeated across separate interviews conducted years apart. It's not proof of collusion, but it suggests familiarity. Preparation. The kind of alignment that doesn't happen by accident. The team leans into that angle.
Carefully.
They don't bring both individuals in at once. They separate. Isolate. Reintroduce. Same environment. Same calm tone. Same measured approach. But now, the questions are layered. Not direct accusations, but intersections. Points where their stories should align naturally if they are truthful. Points where inconsistency would reveal itself if they are not. The first interview holds. Controlled. Predictable. Answers delivered with precision. But control is effort. And effort leaves traces. They note the timing of responses. The slight delay before certain answers. The over-explanation of simple details. The under-explanation of critical ones. Nothing dramatic, but enough to mark. The second interview yields more. Not overtly. Not in confession. But in fracture. A detail shifts.
Subtly.
A timeline that once matched now diverges by minutes. Minutes that matter. Minutes that exist within the gap where the second vehicle was seen. The investigators don't confront the discrepancy immediately. They let it sit. They let the weight of it settle. Because sometimes the awareness of inconsistency is more powerful than the accusation itself. Meanwhile, back in the lab, the trace evidence reaches another stage. The material profile narrows again. Refined through additional comparison. Aligned with a smaller set of manufacturing sources. Still broad enough to avoid immediate identification. But narrow enough to connect to ownership patterns within a defined geographic range. And when those patterns are cross-referenced with the individuals already under quiet scrutiny, the overlap becomes harder to ignore. Not direct ownership. Not registered in their names. But within their reach. Within their environment. A vehicle that fits the narrowing profile tied to someone within their extended circle. Another layer. Another connection. Each one still circumstantial. But together, forming something heavier. Something that begins to feel less like coincidence and more like structure. The witness is brought in again, one final time, not for new information, but for confirmation under refined conditions. They revisit the moment. The position.
The sound.
The faint voice. This time, they introduce a subtle variation. Two figures near the second vehicle. Not one. The reaction is immediate. A flicker of recognition. Not surprise. Recognition.
Yes.
That feels closer. Not certainty. But closer. That detail lands hard. Because it aligns with the emerging theory. More than one person. More than one role. Someone directing. Someone responding. The scene becomes clearer, not in resolution, but in shape. The victim arrives. The second vehicle is already there. Two individuals present. Interaction begins.
Brief.
Controlled. Then escalation. Something shifts. Something forces a change in dynamic. The door opens. Abruptly. Movement accelerates. And then absence. The rest swallowed by darkness. But now, that darkness is thinner. Less absolute. Because the outline around it is stronger. The investigators return to the timeline, overlaying everything again. Victim movement. Primary individual. Associate. Vehicle placement. Witness observation. Each element now occupies a position that, while not perfect, no longer contradicts the others. Instead, they reinforce. Support.
Build.
The structure holds. And that's the moment everything changes internally. Because when a structure holds under pressure, it becomes something that can be acted upon. But they hesitate. Not out of doubt, but out of experience. Because this is the edge. The point where an investigation transitions from building to executing. And execution requires precision. Because if they move now and miss, the opportunity may never come again. So they wait. Just long enough. Continue collecting. Continue refining. Continue applying pressure. Watching. Always watching. For the shift. For the mistake. For the moment when control slips. Because people can maintain a constructed narrative for years. But under sustained pressure, cracks form. And cracks spread. The community feels it too now. The quiet tension that has been building begins to surface. Conversations change tone. Old names are spoken more carefully. People who once dismissed the case now pay attention. Because something is happening again. Something real. Something that refuses to stay buried. And somewhere within that community, two individuals are feeling it more than anyone else. The shift. The weight. The realization that what was once safely in the past is now moving toward them. Slowly. Deliberately. Unavoidable. Because time didn't erase what happened. It only delayed it. And now, that delay is over. The case isn't just reopening anymore. It's closing in. The investigation reaches a point where silence becomes its own kind of evidence. Not because silence proves guilt, but because after nearly 2 decades, the absence of answers begins to reveal something important. The people connected to this case have spent years living with the belief that the past would remain buried. They adapted. They moved forward. They built routines around the assumption that no one would ever return to the questions left unanswered in 2007. But now, those questions are back. And they're sharper than before. The detectives understand that the most important part of reopening a cold case is not discovering what happened. It is discovering what changed. What new piece entered the equation that suddenly made old evidence meaningful again. In this case, that piece was a witness. A person who had carried a memory for years. A person who had seen something that never appeared in the official timeline. A second vehicle. A hidden presence. A moment that transformed a disappearance into something far more deliberate. The investigators begin building a new timeline from the ground up, removing assumptions, removing conclusions that were made when technology was limited and information was incomplete. They stop asking, what happened based on what we knew? And start asking the question that changes everything. What if what we knew was wrong? That question becomes the center of the investigation. Every report from 2007 is opened again. Every photograph. Every interview. Every handwritten note. Nothing is too small anymore. Because cold cases are rarely solved by one dramatic discovery. They're solved by the detail everyone walked past. The detail that was there the entire time. One of those details comes from an old evidence report involving the victim's vehicle. At the time, investigators focused on what was missing.
No habeas guipon.
No clear struggle. No direct evidence identifying another person. But now they focus on what was present. A strange pattern of contamination inside the vehicle. Not enough to trigger suspicion back then. Not enough to build a case. But now, when compared with the possibility of another person being inside, it becomes significant. The vehicle was not just abandoned.
It had been occupied.
Someone else had been there. The question is no longer whether another person was involved. The question is who. The investigators began examining the people closest to the emerging timeline. Not just acquaintances. Not just friends. Everyone. Because the person responsible did not need to know everything about her life. They only needed to know enough. Enough to predict movement. Enough to create an opportunity. Enough to disappear afterward. And that realization leads investigators back to a difficult possibility. The person who knew the most might not have been the person everyone suspected. It might have been someone who stayed outside the spotlight. Someone who watched instead of participated. Someone who understood her routine without being part of it. That possibility changes the way they examine relationships. They stop looking only for emotional connections. They start looking for access. Who could reach her? Who could contact her without raising alarm? Who could arrange a meeting without making it seem unusual? Those questions produce uncomfortable answers. Because the circle becomes wider. And a wider circle means more possibilities. But it also means more opportunities for mistakes. The investigators begin comparing statements again. This time, not searching for contradictions alone. Searching for unnatural consistency. Because people telling the truth remember differently. They remember emotion. They remember fragments. They remember what stood out. But people repeating a constructed story often remember the same things in the same order. The same words. The same explanations. And that pattern appears again. Two individuals connected to the case describe certain events with almost identical language. Not identical enough to prove coordination, but close enough to attract attention. The detectives study the interviews carefully. They listen to the pauses, the breathing, the changes in tone when certain topics appear. And one subject keeps producing the same reaction. The second vehicle. Every time the subject comes up, there is a moment of discomfort. A quick shift. A change in posture. A need to explain before being asked. Investigators know these reactions are not proof. Body language alone cannot solve a murder. But behavior can guide where evidence should go. And evidence is what matters. So they dig deeper. They examine vehicle histories. Not just registered owners. Actual access. Who drove what? Who borrowed what? Who had temporary possession? Because a vehicle does not need to belong to someone to be connected to them. It only needs to be available. That search opens another door. A vehicle matching the description begins appearing in the background of the investigation. Not as a confirmed match. Not yet. But enough similarities exist. The timing. The location. The connection between people. The possibility grows. And with it comes a new challenge. How do you prove that a vehicle from nearly 20 years ago is the same vehicle a witness saw for only moments? The answer is technology. Modern forensic methods. Digital reconstruction. Material comparison. Historical records. The things that didn't exist in 2007. The things that can now turn uncertainty into probability. The investigators submit additional samples for analysis. They wait. Because waiting is part of every major breakthrough. The public sees only the final moment. The arrest. The confession. The courtroom. But behind those moments are months of silence. Months of checking. Months of being wrong. Months of following paths that lead nowhere. The team understands that one mistake could destroy everything. Because whoever was responsible has already proven one thing. They know how to avoid detection. They know how to survive suspicion. They know how to wait. And now investigators must do the same. They continue monitoring developments quietly. No major announcements. No dramatic press conference. The case remains controlled. Because sometimes the greatest advantage investigators have is uncertainty. The person they're watching does not know exactly what they know. And that creates pressure. A pressure that grows every day. Meanwhile, the original witness begins receiving renewed attention from the community. Some people question why they waited so long. Others understand. Because fear does not always disappear with time. Sometimes it grows. Sometimes a person spends years convincing themselves that staying silent was the only way to survive. But when the case reopened, that silence became impossible to carry. And that decision changes everything. Because without that witness, the second vehicle would still be invisible. Without that witness, the timeline would still have a hole. Without that witness, the investigation would still be trapped in the past. Now, investigators have something they never had before. A direction. A possibility. A path forward. But the closer they get, the more dangerous the investigation becomes. Because every step toward the truth is also a step toward the people who have spent years avoiding it. And those people have choices. They can cooperate. They can remain silent. Or they can make a mistake. The investigators know one thing. Eventually, everyone under pressure reveals something. A contradiction. A forgotten detail. A reaction they cannot control. And as the net continues to tighten, the case that once seemed frozen in time begins moving faster than anyone expected. The cold case that haunted a Florida community for nearly 20 years is no longer a story about the past. It is a story unfolding in the present. A story about secrets. About fear. About the consequences of believing that time can erase everything. Because time does not erase. Time preserves. And after all these years, the truth is beginning to surface. Slowly.
Piece by piece.
And somewhere out there, someone knows exactly what happened on that night in 2007. Someone remembers the road. The darkness. The second vehicle. The moment everything changed.
And now.
They know investigators are coming closer. The closer investigators move toward the truth, the more the past begins to fight back. Not with dramatic confrontations, not with obvious signs, but with hesitation, with silence, with small reactions from people who believe the chapter had already been closed. Because when a cold case comes alive again, it does not only reopen evidence boxes. It reopens memories. It reopens fear. And sometimes, it reopens secrets that were never meant to return. For years, the people connected to the Florida 2007 disappearance lived under the comfort of distance. Time created separation. The headlines disappeared. The conversations faded. The community moved forward. But investigators did not forget. They returned to the same questions with different tools, different methods, and one critical difference, the assumption that the original story might not have been the complete story. The second vehicle changed everything. Before that testimony, the investigation had been trapped inside a narrow timeline. A victim, an abandoned vehicle, a disappearance, a trail that vanished into darkness. Now there was another element, another presence. Another person, or possibly multiple people, who existed in that final sequence. And that meant the original investigation had not failed because there were no clues. It had failed because the clues were incomplete. The task force begins what they call a relationship map. Not just friends. Not just family. Everyone who crossed paths with the victim in the months before she disappeared. Every connection becomes a line. Every line becomes a question. Who had access? Who had opportunity? Who knew enough about her routine to predict where she would be? The map grows quickly. Hundreds of names. Most eliminated. Some forgotten. A few remain. And among those remaining names, investigators notice something unusual. The same small group appears repeatedly. Different circumstances. Different records. Different sources. But the same individuals continue appearing around the edges of a case. Not at the center. Never obvious. Always nearby. That is what concerns investigators most. Because people who are directly connected often become the first suspects. But people on the edge? They are the ones who can disappear. They are the ones who can watch without being noticed. The team begins reviewing surveillance footage from locations connected to the victim's final days. Most of it is useless. Old recordings.
Poor quality.
Missing sections. But one piece of footage catches their attention. A vehicle. Not enough to identify. Not enough to confirm. But enough to compare. The shape.
The size.
The timing. The vehicle appears briefly before moving away. Seconds. That's all. But seconds matter. Especially in a case where one witness remembered a vehicle that should not have been there. The footage is enhanced. Frame by frame. Investigators search for details. A unique mark. A damaged area. Anything. The image remains unclear. But the possibility grows. The second vehicle was real. And now there are signs it may have appeared before. Not once. Not randomly. But repeatedly. That changes the investigation again. Because a vehicle that appears once may be coincidence. A vehicle that appears multiple times becomes a pattern. And patterns lead to intent. The detectives return to the people connected to that vehicle. One by one. Quietly. They examine histories. Not only criminal records, but behavior. Financial movements. Travel. Changes in routine. Because after a major event, people often reveal themselves through what they do afterward. Some people disappear.
Some people change.
Some people overcorrect. And one individual shows a pattern that stands out. A sudden change after 2007. New location. Different work. A different social circle. A new life built almost overnight. On its own, it means nothing.
People change.
People move. People start over. But combined with everything else, it becomes another piece. Another question. Why then? Why that moment? Why that sudden shift? Investigators know they cannot build a case on suspicion. They need evidence. And evidence requires patience. So they continue. The forensic team revisits the vehicle evidence again. This time, they focus on areas previously considered insignificant. The places people touch without thinking. The surfaces people leave behind. The small spaces where time does not always destroy everything. New technology reveals additional information. Not a complete answer. But another fragment. A partial profile. A possible connection. Something that suggests contact with another person during that final journey. The finding is carefully reviewed.
Confirmed.
Reconfirmed. Because everyone understands what this means. If accurate, it changes the story. The victim was not simply abandoned. She was with someone. The investigation moves from disappearance to encounter. From uncertainty to interaction. And interaction means questions. Who arranged it? Why did she stop? Why did she trust that person enough to meet them? Those questions become the center. The detectives revisit her final communications again. This time, they look for something different. Not threats. Not obvious warnings. But normality. Because the most dangerous moments often hide behind ordinary conversations. A simple message. A routine meeting. A familiar name. Nothing that screams danger. Nothing that would make someone think twice. That may have been the reason it worked. The person involved did not need to force an opportunity. They only needed to create one. The witness testimony becomes even more important. Because it suggests the encounter was not accidental. The second vehicle was positioned. Waiting. Prepared. And whoever was inside understood that the location offered privacy. That level of planning requires confidence. And confidence usually comes from familiarity. The investigators begin exploring one uncomfortable possibility. The person responsible may have been closer than anyone realized. Not a stranger hiding in the darkness, but someone who understood the victim's world. Someone who knew where to find her. Someone who knew how to appear ordinary. That possibility changes the emotional weight of the case. Because for the community, the danger was always imagined as something outside. A stranger. A random threat. But what if the truth was different? What if the answer had been nearby all along? The reopened investigation begins attracting more attention. News reports return. The phrase spreads again. Cold case reopened. New witness testimony. New evidence. The community that once learned to live with uncertainty begins asking questions again. People remember. They revisit conversations from years earlier. They think about things they ignored. A strange encounter. A vehicle they noticed. A person acting differently. And then, something unexpected happens. Another person contacts investigators. Not a witness to the disappearance. Not someone who saw the event itself. But someone with information about the period afterward. A person who remembers a conversation from years earlier. A conversation that seemed meaningless at the time. A statement. A strange comment. Something that never felt important until now. Investigators listen carefully. Because cold cases are often solved by the moment when someone realizes, I thought it didn't matter. But it did. Every detail matters. Every memory matters. Every unexplained moment matters. The investigation expands again. The timeline grows. The pressure increases. And the people who believed the past was gone begin to understand something terrifying. The past was never gone. It was waiting. Waiting for someone to speak. Waiting for technology to catch up. Waiting for investigators to ask the right questions. And now those questions are being asked. The second vehicle. The hidden witness. The forgotten evidence. The unexplained connections. All of them point toward the same conclusion. Someone knows more than they admitted. Someone has carried the truth for years. And investigators are getting closer to finding out who. Because after nearly 20 years of silence, the silence is finally breaking. The silence that protected the case for nearly 2 decades begins to collapse one piece at a time. Not with a single dramatic revelation. Not with a confession appearing out of nowhere. But with the slow, relentless accumulation of details that no longer allow investigators to look away. The case has changed. What was once a disappearance surrounded by uncertainty has transformed into a carefully reconstructed sequence of events, a timeline filled with missing moments, hidden movements, and unanswered questions that now appear connected. And the closer investigators get, the more they realize something disturbing. Someone did not just survive the investigation. Someone survived because the investigation never had the complete picture. For years, the original case file sat as a reminder of frustration. A folder filled with photographs, statements, and evidence that seemed to lead nowhere. But now, those same pages are being viewed differently. The investigators are no longer searching for a random explanation. They're searching for the missing connection. The person who connects the second vehicle. The witness testimony. The altered timeline. The trace evidence. The question is no longer whether someone else was involved. The question is how many people knew. And how many chose silence. The newly expanded investigation begins examining the period immediately after the disappearance, because investigators know that people involved in serious crimes often reveal themselves after the event. Not through what they say.
Through what they change.
A sudden move. A new phone number. A different routine. An unexpected withdrawal from familiar places. Small adjustments that appear meaningless when viewed alone. But when placed together, they create a pattern. The detectives begin comparing life changes among several individuals connected to the case. Some remain consistent. Some show nothing unusual. But others stand out. One person changes locations shortly after the disappearance. Another suddenly distances themselves from mutual acquaintances. Another begins avoiding conversations about the past. None of these things prove involvement. But investigators are no longer looking for one perfect clue. They're looking for accumulation. Because after 20 years, the truth is rarely sitting in one place. It is scattered. Hidden across memories, records, decisions,
Mistakes.
The investigation returns to the second vehicle. The detail that reopened everything. The vehicle becomes more than transportation. It becomes a symbol of the unanswered question.
Who was inside?
Why was it there? And why did no one mention it before? The detectives reconstruct the possible movements around that night with increasing precision. They examine road layouts, visibility, travel times, locations where a vehicle could stop without attracting attention. And one possibility keeps returning. The location was chosen because it offered control. Not isolation. Control. There is a difference. Isolation means no one is there. Control means someone understands exactly who might appear and who probably will not. That suggests familiarity. Knowledge of the environment. Knowledge of timing. Knowledge of risk. The person involved was not simply lucky. They were prepared. That realization forces investigators to look closer at everyone who knew the area. Not just people connected to the victim, but people connected to the location itself. Residents. Workers. Frequent visitors. Anyone who could understand the landscape. Because sometimes the most important connection is not emotional. It is practical. Someone who knew the road. Someone who knew the blind spots. Someone who knew where darkness provided cover. The witness is interviewed again. This time, investigators focus on something different. Not what was seen, but what was felt. The atmosphere. The behavior of the people present. The movement. The urgency. Because human reactions often reveal what words cannot. The witness describes the moment again. The second vehicle. The figures nearby. The sense that something was wrong. But then comes a detail that causes investigators to pause. The witness remembers that the scene did not appear chaotic.
There was no panic. No confusión.
The people involved seemed to understand what they were doing. That detail is important. Because chaos creates mistakes. Planning creates silence. And this case has always been defined by silence. The investigation team begins considering a difficult possibility. The person responsible may not have acted out of sudden anger or impulse. They may have created a situation where the outcome was already decided before the victim arrived. That changes the entire psychological profile. This was not simply about opportunity. It was about preparation. The detectives return to old interviews from 2007. They focus on statements that were previously considered insignificant. One witness mentioned seeing unfamiliar activity in the area. Another remembered a vehicle that seemed out of place. A third described hearing something unusual but could not explain exactly what. At the time, each statement stood alone. Now they begin connecting. And once connected, they reveal something unsettling. Multiple people may have noticed something, but no one had enough information to understand what they were seeing. The truth was hidden not because there were no clues. The truth was hidden because the clues were separated. That is what makes cold cases so difficult. A single piece of evidence rarely solves them. The answer emerges only when someone finally sees the entire picture. And now investigators are seeing more than ever before. The pressure increases on the individuals still connected to the investigation. Not publicly. Not through accusations. But through presence. The message is clear. The case is active. The past is being examined. And the people who thought they had escaped attention are no longer invisible. One person in particular becomes increasingly important. Their story has remained consistent for years. Almost too consistent. The investigators revisit their timeline carefully.
Dates.
Locations. Travel.
Contact.
At first, everything appears normal. Then they find something small.
A gap.
Only a short period. A missing explanation. Not enough to prove anything, but enough to ask questions. And when asked about it, the response changes. Not dramatically, but noticeably. A defensive explanation. A quick attempt to move away from the topic. Investigators recognize the pattern. The moments people want to avoid are often the moments that deserve the most attention. They continue digging. They discover additional connections. Not direct. Not obvious. But meaningful. A shared location. A familiar name. A relationship that had never been fully explored. Suddenly, the person who seemed distant from the case is no longer distant. They are part of the same network. And networks reveal things. Because people rarely act completely alone. Even when only one person commits the final act, there are often others who know pieces of the truth. Someone who heard something. Someone who noticed something. Someone who helped without understanding. Or someone who understood everything and chose silence. The investigators know the next step will be critical. They need more than suspicion. They need confirmation. They need something that turns possibility into evidence. And that means returning to the science. The forensic team examines the recovered material again. The trace evidence is compared against new databases. The possibilities narrow. Slowly.
Carefully.
Then comes a development. A potential association. Not a final match, but a connection strong enough to justify deeper analysis. The type of connection that can transform an investigation overnight. Because evidence does not need to shout. Sometimes it whispers. And sometimes, after years of silence, a whisper is enough. The case that once seemed frozen begins moving faster. Investigators begin preparing for the next stage. More interviews. More comparisons. More pressure. Because they know something important. The people involved have spent nearly 20 years believing the danger was gone. They built lives around that belief. They created distance from that night. But distance does not erase history. And history leaves marks. Every decision. Every conversation. Every attempt to move forward. All of it leaves a trail. The same trail investigators are now following. Back toward that night in 2007. Back toward the road. Back toward the second vehicle. Back toward the moment when everything changed. And somewhere in Florida, someone realizes the truth they feared most. The case they thought was forgotten is no longer sleeping. It is awake. And it is getting closer. The psychological pressure inside the interrogation rooms of the Broward County Sheriff's Office reached an unprecedented boiling point as detectives prepared to deploy the newly surfaced witness testimony against the aging architecture of an alibi that had stood unchallenged for nearly 2 decades. In the dim, sterile light of Interview Room B, the air smelled faintly of dry erase markers and stale municipal coffee, a sensory backdrop to what was rapidly becoming a masterclass in modern cold case interrogation strategy. Across the table sat the primary person of interest, now a graying, weathered individual whose outward veneer of corporate composure was visibly fraying under the relentless, unblinking gaze of lead investigators who had spent the past 72 hours dissecting every micro-expression, every hesitation, and every swallowed breath. The tactical approach was deliberate, calculated, and terrifyingly precise, rather than dropping the heavy hammer of the new witness statement all at once. The detectives chose to peel back the layers of the suspect's carefully constructed narrative like layers of old wallpaper, exposing the rotting foundation beneath. They laid out the freshly digitized cell phone tower pings from that humid September night in 2007, maps illuminated by glowing computer screens that tracked historical movements across Broward County with an unforgiving, mathematical accuracy that completely contradicted sworn statements given 17 years prior. The suspect shifted uncomfortably in the bolted-down metal chair, hands clasped tightly together to hide a tremor that had begun in the fingertips and was now visibly traveling up the forearm, a microscopic physiological betrayer that seasoned interrogators know how to read like open a book. The silence that followed the presentation of the digital mapping was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic, mechanical hum of the overhead ventilation unit and the low, steady ticking of a wall clock measuring out the seconds of a collapsing alibi. Detectives leaned forward in unison, their body language projecting absolute, unshakable authority as they began to weave the damning narrative provided by the walk-in witness directly into the timeline of the suspect's known movements, creating an airtight cage of circumstantial and testimonial proof from which there was simply no logical escape. Every single detail recounted by the new insider witness, down to the specific make and model of the secondary vehicle used to box in Emily Hartman's car, the exact phrasing of the threats uttered in the pre-dawn darkness of that remote parking lot, and the precise geographical coordinates of the secondary transfer site deep within the cypress-choked fringes of the Everglades, was deployed with devastating psychological impact. The suspect's initial defense, built entirely on the comforting assumption that memories fade, physical evidence decays, and dead men tell no tales, evaporated instantly in the face of such granular, terrifyingly specific corroboration. When confronted with the reality that someone who had stood in the shadows on that fateful night had finally broken the code of silence, the suspect's practiced denial faltered, replaced by a frantic, defensive stuttering that signaled the beginning of the end for a secret pact that had held firm through 17 years of shifting political landscapes, retirement cycles, and changing generations of law enforcement personnel. The interrogation dynamic shifted from an adversarial stalemate to a psychological siege, where every question hurled across the scarred laminate table acted like a battering ram against a crumbling fortress gate. Investigators did not raise their voices. They didn't need to. The raw power of the new testimony spoke for itself, echoing through the small room like a ghostly voice from the past demanding an immediate, inescapable reckoning. As the suspect attempted to construct a convoluted, last-ditch narrative to explain away the newly revealed overlapping timelines, the lead detective systematically dismantled each contradictory claim with surgical precision. Utilizing transcripts of old neighbor interviews, newly recovered vehicle registration cross-checks, and forensic accounting data that traced unexplained financial influxes directly to the weeks following Emily Hartman's disappearance. The walls of the interrogation room seemed to physically close in as the net tightened, trapping the suspect within a labyrinth of undeniable facts, mounting forensic pressure, and the suffocating realization that the protective shroud of time and distance had finally been shredded beyond repair. Outside the precinct doors, the external shockwaves of this interrogation breakthrough were rippling through the local media ecosystem with the force of a localized tempest, transforming routine evening news broadcasts into real-time bulletins of impending justice. News vans with towering satellite dishes lined the curbsides of the sheriff's headquarters, their lenses trained relentlessly on the front entrance as reporters eagerly parsed every leaked crumb of information emerging from the command center. Social media feeds dedicated to true crime sleuthing exploded with frantic speculation, real-time threat updates, and amateur cartography attempts mapping out the newly targeted search zones in the Everglades, turning a local tragedy into a national digital spectacle. The family of Emily Hartman, sheltering quietly away from the glaring lights of the media circus, experienced a roller coaster of emotions too complex and agonizing for simple words, a fragile, trembling hope held in agonizing tension against the crushing dread that the final truths about their daughter's fate might be even darker and more brutal than the decades of haunting ambiguity they had already endured. Every ring of the telephone and every alert pinging on their devices carried the potential for a life-altering announcement, forcing them to relive the raw trauma of 2007 all over again while an entire nation watched and waited with bated breath. Meanwhile, deep within the Tactical Planning Division of the Broward County Sheriff's Office, the operational gears were grinding forward at a relentless, breakneck pace as specialized recovery units prepared to mobilize at the crack of dawn. Armed with the precise spatial coordinates extracted from the new witness testimony, forensic anthropologists, cadaver dog handlers, and heavily equipped tactical dive teams reviewed topographical maps of the state park lands. Bordering the western edge of the county, a notoriously treacherous, swampy wilderness where alligators, dense mangrove thickets, and deep muck had historically served as the ultimate, unforgiving cover for illicit deeds. The logistics of executing a full-scale forensic excavation in such hostile terrain were staggering, requiring amphibious vehicles, specialized soil-sifting equipment, and weeks of meticulous grid searching under brutal humidity and insect swarms. Yet, despite the physical hardships and the sobering knowledge that nearly 2 decades of tropical weather, rising water tables, and organic decay might have severely compromised the preservation of any physical remains, the morale among the search personnel remained fiercely high, galvanized by a collective sense of professional duty and an absolute determination to finally deliver closure to a grieving family. As the midnight hour approached and the briefing maps were rolled up and secured for the night, the heavy stillness in the command room carried the unmistakable weight of history hanging in the balance. Quiet before the storm that promised to tear open the remaining sealed chapters of the state's most chilling cold case and drag its deepest, darkest secrets out into the glaring, unforgiving light of day.